Good evening to all of you out there, and welcome to MTF Biologics' live event on healing multi-ethnic recipients through tissue donation. Thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Lee Brown, and I will be your host this evening. This month, across the United States, we are celebrating National Multicultural Donor Awareness Month. This awareness event was founded in 1996 to bring heightened awareness to donation and transplantation in multicultural communities, focusing primarily on African American, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, and Native American communities. Now, there are lots of conversations that have been taking place this month on the need for organ transplants. However, as an organization focused on tissue donation and transplantation, we at MTF Biologics have the unique opportunity to educate on tissue donation and how it helps millions each year, especially those of multi-ethnic communities. We believe that knowledge is power, and this evening we'll introduce you to the many ways in which tissue is used and share the stories of lives we save and heal every single day. We hope you'll be empowered with knowledge and will join millions of Americans by registering to be organ, tissue, and eye donors. Tonight we have two amazing speakers who will be sharing information with us. They are my knowledgeable colleagues at MTF Biologics, who at the end of their presentations will answer any question you may have about donation and transplantation. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks, Laura.
So first we have, down at the bottom, we have George Herrera, who's the Executive Vice President of Donor Services. George, tell our audience a little bit about yourself and the role that Donor Services plays at MTF.
Gracias, Laura Lee. Bienvenidos a todos y buenas noches. Hi, my name is George Herrera. I'm the Executive Vice President of Donor Services for MTF. I've been with MTF for 25 years, and I have the pleasure of working with the staff and the recovery partners who facilitate the gift of donation every day. They're the ones who work very closely with our donors and donor families.
Awesome. So you're sort of at the beginning of the process when donated gifts come into MTF. Donor Services sort of works along those lines. Now, your tenure, is it over 20 years, George?
Yes, I've been with MTF now for 25 years and for about 30 years in the field of organ and tissue donation.
Lifetime commitment there. Awesome. Awesome. And on my, I guess it's my right or my left, is my colleague, Allison Ling. Allison, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you work in research and development, so introduce our audience to a little bit of what happens back where you work at MTF.
Sure. So I'm Allison Ling. I've been with MTF for about 16 years with the research and development group the whole time. We're a group of about 40 or so individuals that have the privilege to work with some of these tissues that we're going to talk about tonight, and really learning about the science of tissue transplantation and how these tissues can benefit so many people. And we're also looking towards the next, how we can help maximize the use of tissue donation.
So your area has probably lots of PhDs. How many would you say work back there in the lab thinking of new things? I like to think of it as the innovation lab somewhat.
Yeah.
Back there thinking about new things to do with tissue. How many PhDs work in that area?
I think we have maybe half a dozen or so.
Okay. Great. Okay, so let's kick things off with George as he shares an introduction and overview of tissue donation.
All right, thanks, Laura Lee. So for the program for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about an overview of tissue donation and then talk a little bit about musculoskeletal tissue donation and how those grafts are derived from bone and other tissues. And then I'm going to hand it off to Allison, who's going to talk about a few other types of tissue and how they're used. So let's start off with the next slide, please. So for us here at MTF, for my colleagues and I, tissue donation is a professional as well as a personal mission. For me personally, I've had individuals in my family. My father-in-law was a donor. My sister is a recipient. And so this is something that's very personal as well as professional for us. And one of the things that we can say from personal experience is that people of all ages and histories can be tissue donors. In fact, what we encourage you to do is to register to be a donor at registerme.org and talk to your family about your wishes. Because at this point, the assessment for suitability is going to be made at the time of donation, whether that be at the time of death or in the case of birth tissue donation at the time of your child being born. And so the best thing for you to do right now is just to make that decision, document it on registerme.org, and talk to your family about it so that they know what your wishes are as well. And I bet you didn't know that 25 million individuals each year receive a tissue transplant. Everyone's familiar with organ donation and organ transplantation, and that is very important, happens quite often, but not nearly as often as tissue donation and tissue transplantation, which tissue grafts are implanted practically in every hospital around the country, actually many hospitals around the world, and even in many doctors' offices, dentist offices and other clinics, clinical situations like that. So it's something that happens every day and touches many individuals in our day-to-day community, many of whom may not even know that they received a tissue graft. So that's why we're trying to raise awareness of about tissue donation and tissue transplantation. This is, I think, one of the most, one of the facts that I think shocks people the most, that one tissue donor can help upwards of 75 individuals. And really, sometimes it exceeds even 100 patients that one donor can help. And that's through all the variety of grafts that can be derived from one donation. We're going to talk about those tonight, but just think about the impact that one person can have on individual patients who are suffering from either a disease process or a trauma that is affecting their own tissue. So let's start off with what tissues can be donated. And let's start off with the term tissue donation first. So tissue donation is a catch-all phrase to cover all the various parts of the body that can be donated So I like to start at the top of the body and work my way down. And the first one is ocular or cornea donation. So as many folks know, the corneas can be donated, and we'll talk a little bit about how that tissue is used. As we move our way down the body, the next part of the body that can be donated is heart for valves. So we'll talk a little bit, and I'll show you a recipient who's a recipient of heart for valves. But in addition to the hearts, the other part of the cardiovascular system that can be donated are veins and arteries, and even the pericardium, which is the lining that surrounds the heart. We'll show you how those are used in surgeries every day. Next, we'll cover the musculoskeletal system as we're making our way down the body. If you think about the long bones and connective tissue of the upper extremities and lower extremities, so the bones of the legs and the arms, and related soft tissues. We'll talk about how those become bone grafts and can heal patients with either orthopedic traumas or other diseases that affect the bones. The next tissue that can be donated at the time of death is skin. And skin, as I think most can surmise, is used primarily to care for patients that have severe burns or wounds that won't heal. But we'll also show you a couple of other surgical applications that can be used with skin, and that's primarily in the area of breast reconstruction post-mastectomy. So Allison's going to tell you all about that. Moving to donations, a donation that can occur at when someone is alive, and that is birth tissue donation. So mothers who are delivering a baby can donate the placenta and amnion and chorion, umbilical cord. All that can be donated at the time of birth. And so birth tissue donation is one of those very important donations that we'll talk about. And again, that one differentiates from the others because that's one that can be given when someone is alive. So let's talk briefly about each of those and then get into a little bit more detail as we go along, again, each of the parts of the body. So we talked about cornea transplant, and the easiest way to think about a corneal transplant or a corneal donation is the cornea is that thin contact lens sort of covering of our eye. It is the lens through which we are able to see. And there are many conditions and many disease processes and trauma that can create scarring or thickness or cloudiness and prevent an individual from being able to see. Their eye still works, it's just the lens is not clear for the individual, the patient, to be able to see. So through corneal donation and corneal transplant, what happens is the cornea is actually removed and then replaced with a donor cornea. And this happens about 85,000 times a year, which is just phenomenal to think about. One individual donor, of course, can provide 2 corneas, so that can go to both to one patient or to separate patients individually. So again, it can really have an effect on someone who's having trouble seeing because their corneas are damaged. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about cardiovascular tissue. And I think the important thing to remember about this, especially as we talk about heart for valves, is that heart for valves and conditions that affect the heart, congenital defects and so forth, and those that need heart for valves typically tend to be young patients. We're talking about from infants to young adults who have some sort of condition that is affecting their heart. They're growing, and so they need a graft that is able to grow with them. And so that's why we see individuals like our recipient here who tend to be young individuals who need heart for valves and are the recipients of these tissues. However, the other tissues, the other cardiovascular tissues that can be donated are veins and arteries, and those are primarily taken from the blood vessels of the leg and can be used in procedures like bypass surgery, restoring recirculation in the legs, and creating shunts for dialysis patients who have lost access due to their vessels just having, just having been dialyzed so often. The veins tend to collapse, and so they're in need of a new access, and donated veins and arteries can be used for those procedures. So before we move on to bone donation, let's talk a little bit about Manny's story. So Manny is a former colleague of ours. He's an engineer at MTF, and he's going to tell you about his story of receiving a bone graft.
Yo trabajo para una organización en los Estados Unidos que se dedica a trabajar el hueso humano que es donado por familia, por gente que en un momento dado murió. Yo como ingeniero mecánico, mi ayuda en esta compañía es desarrollar el proceso, para modificar este hueso y de esa manera más tarde sea trasplantado. Yo he trabajado con la compañía ya por 13 años y mis estudios los llevé a cabo en México. Tuve 2 años más hice un máster. Durante muchos años yo estuve viviendo con dolor. Progresivamente ese dolor, si mal no recuerdo, empezó hace como más de 10 años atrás. Y inicialmente era un dolor en el cuello solamente, y con los años ese dolor se fue extendiendo a los hombros, se fue extendiendo hasta llegar a un punto que llegó a extenderse a los brazos. Y ¿cómo se llama? Yo buscaba ayuda, fui a ver a médicos y los médicos me decían de que me dijeron en un momento dado de que yo tenía dos discos herniados. Al principio solamente me medicaban con pastillas para matar el dolor, lo cual con el tiempo dejó de trabajar, dejó de funcionar esas pastillas. La última vez fui a visitar a un doctor en Nueva York, en el Bronx. Este doctor me hizo unos rayos X y me vio lo que yo ya le había dicho, le había mostrado otras placas más anteriores, y vio que realmente el problema estaba ahí, que mis 2 discos, habían 2 discos en la parte baja de mi cuello que se habían movido hacia afuera y estaban apretando unos nervios que se conectaban con los brazos y en la parte alta de mi cabeza y hombros y todo eso. El doctor me dijo que eso era lo que estaba ocasionando el dolor. Y bueno, eso fue hace como 5 años atrás que vi al médico. El médico hizo una evaluación y creyó no conveniente todavía operarme. El tiempo pasó y yo seguí sufriendo de esos dolores. Yo fui a visitar otra vez a mi doctor en Nueva York y le dije que yo no podía seguir viviendo con este dolor, que necesitaba que me operara o quisiera algo porque ya esto era imposible de seguir viviendo con ese dolor. Se me dice las opciones que habían, que la cirugía era posible y se me explicó los riesgos y bueno, yo tomé la decisión de que se haga la cirugía y gracias a Dios la cirugía fue hecha, ha sido un éxito y ahora me siento mucho mejor. Siento que esta cirugía fue lo mejor decisión que haya tomado. Siento que ahora puedo estar con mi familia más tiempo. ¿Por qué? Porque ahora ya no tengo ese dolor, ya no quiero estar en mi casa metido, ahora puedo estar afuera disfrutándola con ellos. Al trabajo, puedo ir al trabajo más contento, ya sé que ese dolor ya no está ahí más. Puedo jugar fútbol, puedo ir a nadar, que es las cosas que más me gustan hacer. Entonces estoy muy contento y feliz de que esa operación haya sido un éxito. A la familia de los donantes me gustaría a través de este video decirles muchas gracias por darme esta mejor calidad de vida, el regalo que la familia hizo donando. Es una cosa que me ha ayudado a mí y está ayudando a muchas otras personas. Es bueno vivir una vida sin dolor diario. Quiero aprovechar este momento y agradecerle a todos ellos que hacen eso de donar su cuerpo humano para que otras personas se beneficien y puedan recuperar esa calidad de vida que todos deseamos tener siempre.
Okay, so that was Manny's story, and it's a story of how he received a bone graft that was used for a cervical fusion in his neck. That is one of the many ways, and these are some of the grafts that bone can be used to address either a patient's diseased condition or trauma or other condition that's causing them some pain and so forth. So these are examples of bone grafts, and the bone is a wonderful material that can be made into a variety of shapes. As you can see, it really is a very versatile material. Some of the images that you see there are of a syringe and a jar that actually has bone that has been made into a putty. It's malleable and moldable and can be put into different places to help heal the bone. And so these grafts are used in a variety of different procedures. Again, they all usually relate to repairing damaged bone or bone that has been damaged either through a disease process or trauma. A lot of these are spinal grafts. Some of these are procedures even that don't occur in a hospital. For example, some of these are dental procedures that are used to build up jaws before a dental implant is put in. But one of the most dramatic uses of bone is for cancer patients who have osteosarcoma. And again, unfortunately, this is a condition that hurts or affects young patients. It is part of the growing process. And so you see a lot of young patients, pediatric patients with osteosarcoma. And the bone graft, these large grafts are used in limb salvage procedures, because if you have bone in your cancer in your bone and a large segment of the bone has to be removed, it has to be replaced with something. Otherwise, an amputation has to occur. And so we help a lot of these patients, again, a lot of these young patients, and that's just one very poignant example of a bone graft, but there are many, many other hundreds of ways and thousands of ways it can be used, and it helps millions of patients around the country and the world. Here's one of those patients that it helped. This is Liz, and Liz is from Puerto Rico originally. She tells the story of actually stepping out of her door, out of her house, and stepping down some stairs and twisting her ankle and actually having a great fall that actually created a pretty bad injury for her, both bone and skin injury. And it was a very painful situation for her. She received various bone grafts and a skin graft to help her healing of her foot. She was immobile for a while. But the thing that really, I think that Liz took away after she was, after her body was healed, due to the tissue donation and the bone grafts, is that because she came from Puerto Rico, she recalled that in that country, many people did not believe in donation. And she always remembers that it was just something that was just a bit of distrust in the system. So this made her a convert to say tissue donation and donation in general helps people, because she had been helped and she received the gift of tissue donation. And so now she's a very big proponent of sharing the story of how tissue donation helps people. And she has gone on to not only lead a very active life with her dog, but she's also an art teacher, and so she spends a lot of time on her feet painting and teaching others how to do their art. Another part of the musculoskeletal system that can be donated and can be transplanted are the soft tissues, the tendons, ligaments, and cartilage of the musculoskeletal system. These are some examples of those grafts. And as you can imagine, these grafts are used primarily in the joint to replace torn tendons and ligaments, to replace soft tissue like cartilage and meniscus that has been damaged. And it helps to restore those joints and restore the mobility. I think one misnomer for these tissues is that they're often referred to as sports medicine tissues, or these are sports medicine injuries. And while the people who do tend to have these sorts of injuries are very active, they're not what you would think of as a professional adult. They're folks that are either participating in day-to-day sports, like one of the stories I'll tell you here in just a moment, or can be doing something as simple as stepping off a curb or stepping them in a hole and twisting their knee the wrong way. And it's that simple in which you can tear a tendon or ligament in your leg that then requires one of these repairs. That happened to my sister. My sister is a recipient of an MTF tendon for an ACL reconstruction in her knee, and she's doing very well, I'm happy to report. And just like that, we have another story that I'd like to share with you, and that's the story of Ivy. Ivy was also a tendon graft recipient. Ivy is a very active person. She was skiing and hurt her knee while she was skiing. She tore again her ACL, or anterior cruciate ligament, and then had to have that tendon replaced. Ivy is also a nurse. And even though she was a nurse, she really wasn't very familiar with tissue donation and transplantation. But now, after her surgery, she's now not only regained all of her activity. Again, she's very active, not only in skiing, but she loves walking her dog. And now, as a healthcare professional, as a nurse, she's now out there advocating for tissue donation because of her experience with that process. So now let me turn it over to my colleague, Allison.
Great. Thanks, George. Hi, everyone. I'm going to kick off my segment with a really inspiring story of a young woman who's benefited from multiple life-saving skin graft donations. She's overcome incredible odds to not only survive, but thrive in life. This is Terrea Pitt, a fitness enthusiast and a mining engineer who was caught in a really bad wildfire while competing in an ultramarathon in Australia back in 2011. So let's watch this video and hear about her incredible journey.
I've always loved running, and I think I really just loved the sense of adventure I got when I would go for a run. And that's part of the reason why I was drawn to trail running or ultramarathons. On the 2nd of September 2011, I was running in an ultramarathon, which is usually around 100 kilometers. So I was a quarter of the way through the ultramarathon and I became trapped by a grass fire. You know, I remember just being faced with a wall of flames, and the thoughts that were going through my head was how unfair it was that I was never going to see Michael again, and that we wouldn't be able to create our future together, and that we would never have kids. We waited for hours for help to arrive, and help arrived in the form of the local paramedics from town. And I recognised one of the paramedics because I used to volunteer with her on my weekends off from work. So I said, "Hey Bonnie, how are ya?" Now she just gave me a blank look. She didn't even recognise me. And so I said, "It's me, it's Terrea." She didn't say anything back, but I noticed a tear start to roll slowly down her face. And, although part of me thought I was fine, I'd be back at work on the Monday, seeing her tears made me think maybe this is way more serious than I could have ever anticipated. I was medevaced to hospital. I walked off the helicopter into the hospital. I was begging the doctors and nurses, "Can someone please call Michael?" I woke up around a month later in a hospital in Sydney.
So when Terrea was in hospital, I got a call at about 12 o'clock in the middle of the morning from a doctor at the hospital who had told me all about the accident, what had happened to Terrea. And I was quite shocked, and my initial thoughts were, how bad was the accident? How bad is she? And they sort of said, it's life-threatening.
When you're burned, what they do is they'll remove your burnt and damaged skin, but then they need something to cover you with. Now, real skin is the best stuff to use because it's got infection-fighting properties. But when I was injured, there was no skin in Australia at the time. And so my surgeons frantically searched the world to find some skin, and thankfully for me, they found some skin in America through the MTF. Now that skin got packaged, got sent to Australia, but then came my surgeon's next problem. Customs in Australia would not let this life-saving package of skin through.
And so the surgeon called the customs up and he said, "Look, if you don't allow this skin to come through, she'll die, and she'll die this afternoon. I've done everything I can to preserve her life." So that was a pretty full-on moment, and so the customs heard that and they actually cleared the skin, which was illegal at the time.
Thankfully for me, they got the skin, they covered me with it, and within a couple of days, I made a dramatic improvement. My vital signs all turned around, and my doctors managed to put me in a relatively stable position. Without that skin that was donated, I would not be here today. That skin literally saved my life, and it was due to the generosity and the grace of 16 Americans that I'm here today. It's very easy for us to get caught up in the narrative of our life, and it's very easy for people to start using excuses. So, this happened, so I can't do this, or I'm too busy, so I can't do that, and I don't have a supportive partner, and this happened to me. And yeah, bad stuff does happen to good people every single day, but that's not what defines you. What defines you is how you respond to those challenges, how you cope with those challenges. I'm incredibly passionate about tissue donation. The impact that donor has is extraordinary. One tissue donor can help to heal and transform the lives of up to 100 different people. So that's a pretty extraordinary legacy that donor leaves, and I think that's a really beautiful thing for someone to do.
When Terrea was in the coma, it was very uncomfortable, but she was the girl that I fell in love with, and she was still going to be the same girl I fell in love with. And so it was at that time when she was in the coma that I bought her a diamond ring. Without that skin, she wouldn't be here. So I always think about that, and it'll be in our lives forever, that some unknown people in America have beautifully given their skin, and it saved her life, which has given me back my girlfriend, and we now have a future together. Hopefully we're going to have kids and get married, and Terrea's fit and healthy, and she's inspiring people all over Australia and the world, and life's good again.
Wow. Okay, so I've seen that video several times, and every time it's like, the first time I get just as inspired as the first time I've seen that story. And actually, since that video was made, her and Michael have since gotten married, and they now have 2 beautiful kids. So she's back to running and just living a very full life. So that's just awesome to see. Okay, so we've heard about skin grafts being truly a life-saving tissue. Other treatments using skin grafts include hernia repair, cleft palate, and periodontal or dental procedures, where the muscle, skin, or even gum tissue needs support and needs to be reconstructed. Skin grafts can also help women to heal, not only physically, but emotionally, who choose to go for breast reconstructive procedures following a difficult treatment for breast cancer and leading to mastectomy. The skin graft helps to provide support and rebuild that physical tissue that's been damaged or removed. And we're going to hear more about that with Mary's story, which is coming up next. Okay, so here's Mary, and I just learned that she's Laura Lee's cousin. Mary's a teacher, marathon runner, practices yoga, leads a very, very healthy lifestyle. And like so many other women, she received that devastating news from her doctor of breast cancer. She was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, which is a type that is much more common among young premenopausal minority women. So let's see Mary's story and how she benefited from tissue donation.
I opened up an email on a Friday afternoon that said that I had an 80% chance of breast cancer. That was devastating. It was confirmed that I had triple negative breast cancer, the type of breast cancer that minority women get, the type that if you get it, depending on when it is that they find it, the chances of survival are not that great. So I knew that I had a long battle ahead of me. And I started to wonder, how did this happen? Because I am seriously the picture of health. I run, I take yoga, I was vegan. I did everything that I could to be very healthy in life, and yet still cancer chose me as one of its victims. My initial reaction was, I'm not going to make it. And nobody ever thinks that they're not going to live out their life the way that they expect to live it. And I did ask, how is this going to change my life? Would I be able to get my life back after chemo and surgery? But most important, would I live and survive to do all of the things that I enjoy doing? I decided to go through and have a double mastectomy because the chances of that coming back was not something that I was willing to go through. After my first chemo session, my cousin came to visit. And she saw how devastated I was, but she also knew that I had a life after I recovered from chemo and from surgery. So she started to talk to me about tissue donation for reconstruction. And I started to listen to her. And I thought that maybe my life could go back to the way that it was, because I would be provided with the opportunity to get breast reconstruction using donated tissue. I asked my surgeon, is this a possibility for me? And when I found out that I could use the donated tissue provided by MTF, I started to look at life differently. As an educator, I think that a large part of it is not only that I survived this amazing battle, but the fact that I can feel confident standing in front of people. And I didn't think it would matter much, but I think that the first day that I went back to lecturing, it gave me the confidence to stand in front of people and not think that they're looking at me in a different way. After reconstructive surgery, I was able to go back to doing the things that I enjoy doing. I love to run, and running provides me with an outlet. It's the freedom to be out there and to just go on long walks. It's a stress reliever after a very hectic day. I was able to go back to doing yoga, and the poses that I used to do it's just thrilling to me every time that I go. I am able to go out socially with family and friends and to feel confident when I'm out there. I'm enjoying life the way that I did before, and this reconstructive surgery using donated tissue is one of the moments in my life I'm totally grateful for. I was recently able to write to my donor family through the MTF Linking Lives program, and I was able to express to them the gratitude that I have for the donated tissue by their loved ones. Without that donated tissue, I would not be able to live the life that I live now.
Okay, so breast cancer is something that affects just about everyone, right, in a personal way, either directly or someone that we know. So I'm sure stories like Mary's hits home for many of you out there. It's also helpful to know that we can help educate women in their options and ability to make a choice about breast reconstruction. It's something that when we speak to so many breast cancer survivors, they're not even aware that they have that option. Okay, so the next topic I'll be touching on is diabetes and how it affects the minority community and those that are in need of organ or tissue transplantation. Minorities represent about 60% of the national organ transplant waiting list, which is currently over 100,000 people who are waiting. You can see the stat here that about 30 million people in the US have diabetes. So that's about 1 in every 10 people. And it's most prevalent in African Americans, American Indians, Latinos, and Asians. That was a surprise to me. I was actually diagnosed pre-diabetic and had no idea that this is actually prevalent in my own community. Diabetes often affects kidney function, and about 1 in 3 adults with diabetes may have chronic kidney disease, which can lead to kidney failure and possibly needing a kidney transplant. In 2020, there were more than 39,000 transplants, and as I mentioned, more than 100,000 people waiting for an organ transplant. About 85% of those patients on that waiting list are waiting for a kidney. Diabetes also affects blood circulation, and you'll see here that wound care becomes critical because diabetic patients will often suffer from injuries and infections of the legs and feet. And a lot of times they may not even be aware of the injury because they don't have much feeling or sensation in their lower limbs. This means they might be delayed in getting to the doctor. And even after multiple treatments, that wound will not heal on its own. So for these types of cases, we've seen that tissue donations, various types of tissues, which I'll be speaking about, have an amazing set of qualities and characteristics that can help jumpstart that wound healing process. So as George mentioned, one way that women can also choose to become a donor is for those that have given birth. They can donate what we call birth tissues. This includes the placenta and the amniotic sac, which is the tissue or the membrane that's surrounding the baby during pregnancy. Birth tissue has been found to contain great wound healing benefits, such as being anti-inflammatory and preventing scar tissue formation. And as I mentioned before, diabetic foot ulcers and other persistent wounds have a tough time healing on their own. But we've seen that by applying this type of tissue, it results in wounds starting to close in a matter of 2 to 4 weeks. So that's amazing. Okay, so here's Pete. Pete's a veteran. He's a father of 3 kids, just enjoying his retired life. Pete actually doesn't have diabetes, but his story is quite fascinating. He had a small pimple on his leg, and after a fishing trip, it became infected and grew into a larger wound. He was in severe pain, couldn't walk. So Pete went to the hospital. He was diagnosed with a venous ulcer and went through weekly treatments over 10 months with no improvement. Finally, his doctor suggested a placental graft, like we just saw in the previous images. And just after 2 months, they got that wound to heal. So now Pete's back to being active. He lost over 40 pounds, and now he's waiting on knee replacement surgery so he can continue on with enjoying an active life. Okay, so we've covered a lot of different types of tissues. So hopefully that gives everyone an idea of just how a single active donation, a single donor can help more than 75 people. The last type of tissue that I'm going to talk about is adipose. This comes from, believe it or not, our fat. It's something that you're still learning about. It's relatively new in the field of tissue transplantation. Comes from the fat tissue. And normally, everyone thinks about fat and nobody wants it and we're trying to get rid of it. And it really, is something that we don't view as being beneficial in any way. However, this adipose tissue is derived from the fat tissue. It acts as a scaffold that's been shown to retain natural growth factors, cytokines, and matrix proteins that help to encourage fat cells and blood vessels to form while managing inflammation. So this has a great benefit also in persistent wounds that won't heal, like diabetic foot ulcers. And we're going to hear about Frankie's story as an example of how adipose helped in his difficult situation. Okay, so here's Frankie. He's married. Here he is with his wife. He's from Toms River, New Jersey. Also loves to go fishing. And he was driving heavy equipment for a living. So he was on his feet all the time. He has diabetes, and it led to complications with continuous foot ulcers, which unfortunately led to amputation of some of his toes. But fortunately, in 2019, he had yet another ulcer beginning to form. He got to his doctor right away. And his doctor actually suggested trying donated adipose tissue. And they were able to get that ulcer to start to heal in just within a week. And it was completely healed in a month, which was unbelievable result for Frankie. So let's hear Frankie's story with the next video.
My name is Frank Perez. I live in Toms River, New Jersey. I'm retired from the heavy equipment recovery. I drove the heavy tow trucks. There were 60-ton trucks, and we would go out on recoveries of major accidents. My work would require me to be on my feet 14 to 16 hours. Very manual work, nothing behind a desk, never. It took a beating on my legs, my feet especially. I've been a diabetic for over 20 years. I knew to take care of my feet. But over the years, time went on, with my job, I started using my feet as a hammer. And my left toe caught a sore in it. It got to the point where it was just too painful. And I went to see my doctor, Dr. Rogalski.
When Frank first came to us, we've seen him for his routine care and things of that nature before. And we see our diabetics quite frequently, so we can hopefully head off these problems when they're smaller. But he developed an ulcer more in the balls of the feet. And that necessitated us removing the forefoot, which we call transmetatarsal amputation. And then subsequently to that, sometime after, he developed problems with the right side, with a little digit removed on the other side, and then he developed this ulceration on his fifth toe because he had a very severe hammer toe, and it rubbed in his shoe, and it created an ulceration.
My doctor suggested to try a new treatment called Leniva to help with my condition.
Leniva is an allograft adipose tissue form that is placed beneath the skin into the subcutaneous tissue. MTF offers an allograft. This adipose means fat. So the allograft means it comes from the same species, so it comes from human. It's fatty tissue donated from a donor that has passed. The family wants to use the tissue to help other people. And so think of it like a beehive, so to speak. You take the bees out, you take the honey out, and you're left with the comb. Okay, so that acts as a scaffolding. It goes in, and it creates a happy environment for other cells, fat cells, to come into that area, and they start populating that scaffold, and they start secreting adipose, fatty tissue. So I thought about if we could take the Leniva and put that in there, not so much regeneration of his fat, but the fat itself can make pretty darn good blood vessels because fat's highly metabolically active. It needs to have good blood flow to support its metabolic activity. So I thought, well, if we inject that into the digit, not only can we blow up that skin, give him more cushion so when he's in his shoe, but would it help in the aid of making blood flow, increasing flow of blood there, and then would it also help to be able to heal that? And it accomplished both of those tasks.
Within 4 weeks of my next appointment, it was gone. It was healed. It was just pink tissue there. And now it's a few months later, it's been over 6 months, and you can't even tell. You can't even tell that was an open sore. I don't take walking for granted now. Before I just used it as a job, part of my job requirement. Now I look forward to walking every day. I enjoy taking my dog for a walk every morning, 5:30 in the morning. Before the treatment, made it so unbearable to do it. And since after the treatment, it's made it so easier. My son and me love going fishing every summer. We try to go all the way up to December fishing. When I'm out there with the kids fishing, I just go to another place, and it makes me be thankful that I'm still with them, able to do the things I do, just because I have my foot still. Diabetics would see a sore in their foot. Don't hesitate. Go to your doctor. Have it looked at, and if the doctor thinks he's has to amputate it, talk to him about Leniva and see if he will treat you with it, and give it a shot. You really got nothing to lose but your toe. I'm hoping this encourages people to sign up for donors. That's all it is a little check off on your driver's license. You do check marks all day. Just put that little mark on your license and let your family know what you want done. MTF saves and heals lives. Thanks to the gift of donation, I'm back up on my feet again.
Wow, so many amazing stories there. I think I shed a tear of two, and I've seen these videos so many times, but just like you said, Allison, every time I watch it, just hearing what tissue donation is doing in the lives of others. And I want to talk about something. Oftentimes, I think we sort of hear about tissue transplantation being minimized. We hear conversations about it as if it's only health restoring and not life saving. But when you watch Terrea Story, I mean, you hear her talk about, she just had minutes to live. If it weren't for tissue skin grafts coming to her in Australia, she would not be around. She would not have the family that she has today. I interview recipients all the time, and I cannot tell you how many of them tell me, it's just back surgery, but I couldn't work. I couldn't see my kids again. I couldn't do the things I love again. And what is life if you can't do the things that you enjoy doing? So, it's really all a matter of perspective, whether it's life-saving or health restoring, all depends on who you're helping.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Laura Lee. And I think you're hitting upon a very good theme. And I've heard the same thing as well, where we think of life saving as literally saving life. And that's very important. And you're right that we do that with some of our grafts. But we've heard so many times recipients say, I wouldn't have had my old life. I wouldn't have been able to work. I wouldn't have been able to play with my kids. I wouldn't have been able to do all the things that I used to do. It saved my life. It saved that life that I used to have, that I know that I now can do all those activities again.
So we have tons of questions coming in, and I'm not even sure which one to put up first, but let's see. Jamie, thank you for your first question. You love these stories of donated tissue. Here's one that either of you can answer. Do you have to take anti-rejection drugs with tissue transplants? We know that's true about organ transplants, but is that the same for tissue transplants?
Well, I'll start it off and then turn it over to Allison as well. But no, the short answer is no, you do not. In most cases, and this is not in every case, but in most cases, the tissue itself is a scaffold. And you heard doctors mention that, and that scaffold is there to create an environment for your own tissue, the patient's own tissue, to grow and proliferate the tissue that is formed by the patient's own healing body. So, Allison, do you want to add to that?
Yep, you're absolutely right. So with tissue grafts, any genetic material or anything that would cause an immune reaction is removed. So that's part of what the process that organizations like MTF are doing to ensure that these are safe and that there aren't going to be reactions when they're placed into the recipients.
Great. So very different from organ transplants, no anti-rejection medications needed, no need to worry. So you're not matching by blood type or anything like that. Okay, let's get another question out there. We've got some really good ones. Morzina says, some people are hesitant about tissue and organ donation, perhaps because of religion, like Liz Arango. What do you say to them if they're not sure that their religious faith supports donation? George, what do you say to someone who says, I'm Catholic, but I don't think it's against, I think it's against my faith. I don't really know. How should we guide individuals who aren't sure what their faith teaches about transplantation and donation?
I would say ask your faith leader about that. And every major religion is supportive of donation. Even some religions may take a neutral position on it and leave it up to the individual. But overall, it is overwhelmingly supported by all of the major religions.
Yeah. And I know that we have some statements from all the major faiths and religions on our website. So if you go to www.mtfbiologics.org, you will find information about what every major religion or faith says about organ and tissue donation. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get another question up there. How about this one? Justine, I worry that if I sign up to be a donor and it's on my license, it may compromise the quality of my hospital care. Do you think this is an issue? This is a common theme among multicultural communities, or maybe just anyone in general. I don't think it's necessarily something that people of multicultural communities think about, but it is more pronounced, I would say. George, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think this is a very common belief many times. And again, what it says is that there sometimes is a general lack of trust in the healthcare system. I think we're seeing that currently with the COVID pandemic that we're dealing with. There's just a lack of trust in the system, so to speak, especially the healthcare system. And so this is a common concern. One of the things, the way I answer this always is to say, telling people that you want to be a donor by it being on your driver's license is a terrible way to tell that, because usually in a trauma or in a healthcare situation, your driver's license is nowhere near where you are. And so that's why we always say register to be a donor, because it's not until after your death has been declared that the registry is accessed, and we're looking up to see if you are a registered donor. So it's definitely an after the fact thing. However, I do know that some states will allow you to register to be a donor on your driver's license or through the Driver's License Bureau, but not have it show up on your driver's license. Again, it goes in the registry, which is accessed afterwards, but there's no visible indication on your license that you are a donor. And hopefully that addresses some concerns.
Any thoughts on that, Allison?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And I think George made a good point. Donation really isn't considered until the time of death. So, it shouldn't stop anyone from registering to become a donor.
Yeah, I can tell you from experience, my husband and I, we both are registered donors. My driver's license says organ donor with a big heart, and his says absolutely nothing on there. So he wants to make sure he knows that healthcare professionals will take care of him. But he says, just in case, I want to make sure it's in the registry, but not on my license. So I think most states have that option where you can register without having it be public on your driver's license. But really, the most important thing is to really have that conversation. The Driver's License Bureau is sort of one of those awkward places to have to be asked about donation. I mean, imagine my 16-year-old, when she just got her license recently, she was excited about being able to drive on her own, and she was struck with the question, do you want to be a donor? And it's really not the time when people are thinking about life or death decisions. So, one of the things that we hope to come out of this session is that some of you will take these conversations to your family at the dinner table and have discussions about what you'd want to happen and make decisions about donation when it's not an urgent situation or at the time of death.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Laura Lee. And that's what I was going to say, was that as important as it is to register is talking to your family about it, because we still do have to talk to them at that time. There's some questions that we're going to have to ask them about your medical history and other information that we need to know about you to facilitate the donation. So even though you said yes, if your family says no, or if they're unwilling to cooperate with us at that time, we may not be able to facilitate that donation. So please speak to your family and say, this is what I want to do. And there's something about someone's last wish that family members always do want to make sure that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Good discussion there. Let's see if we can answer another question. Victor has a good one. So what are some of the barriers that are keeping many in minority communities from saying yes to becoming donors? We talked about one of them, which is the perception that the healthcare professionals may do something to compromise your care if you sign up to be a donor. Are there some others that you guys can think about?
Yeah, I think for me, in our culture, we don't really talk about death too much. We're very superstitious, so it's not something that we talk about. So I think just there's just a lack of awareness that transplantation and donation is even an option. So it's always an interesting conversation that I have with my family and friends.
Yeah, I'll add a comment to that, which is it's a really good point, Allison. The other one is that I think many people in minority communities and multi-ethnic communities don't think that it benefits their community. And I think we showed many examples here today of the fact that, some of these, anybody can suffer a trauma, anybody can suffer a disease in their bone, but there are some conditions like diabetes that do affect certain kind of communities, minority communities, and that leads to the need for tissues or organs. And so there is very much a benefit to these minority communities. And when it comes to, even though you don't have to match for tissue, when it does come to organs, matching does matter. And so if you're able to donate a kidney, it's more likely to benefit someone from your community because of the matching that has to take place.
Yeah. Really think that knowledge is power in this instance. The more you know about something, the better you can make decisions. And we know that multicultural communities are very generous communities, and we will donate when asked if we're informed and educated. So hopefully this platform will, give us a lot more information about some of these topics that are often not discussed at all. Let's take another question. I think we still have time. Oh, here's a good one. Corinne, thank you for that question. How quickly does tissue, once received, need to be transplanted into a donor? Who wants to take that one?
I could try to take that one.
Okay.
Okay, so tissue, unlike organs, fortunately, different organizations and researchers have found ways to preserve those tissues. So the important thing is that it gets to a tissue bank like MTF quickly, but there are ways that we're able to preserve that graft so that it doesn't become an urgent need to deliver it and get it to a hospital.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, so just to give an example to Allison's point, a heart, for example, needs to be transplanted within 4 or 5 hours of being recovered from the donor. It's almost immediate. Whereas tissue that comes to MTF, even though we're going to try to maintain some cell viability, for example, we have up to 72 hours to start processing that tissue.
Wow.
The graft's not going to be available quite yet. We still have to go through some other testing and some other processes. So it may be weeks before that graft is available. So we're comparing weeks to hours. And so we do have a little bit more time.
So can we speak a little bit to tissue? Is it safe? I mean, is it tested? What happens to tissue before it can be transplanted into someone? How can we assure the public that what they're receiving is good tissue?
Yeah, so I'll start that off and then turn it over to Allison. So the tissue available in the United States is very, very safe. We have a very, very rigorous system. The entire system is very strong. It starts off with some of the regulations in place, and there are federal and state regulations. There are voluntary standards. We, as an accredited tissue bank by the American Association of Tissue Banks, follow the AATB standard, and then we have our own standards, which are pretty high. So the tissue in the United States is quite safe. It undergoes rigorous testing. It undergoes a very thorough screening process of medical records and so forth. And we even do an inspection of the donor body, again, just to make sure that that everything corresponds. So it's quite a rigorous process, one that, as I said, not only exceeds federal and state standards and voluntary standards, but our very high standards as well.
Great. So we talked a little bit about the fact that you can register to become an organ donor, but we learned about placenta donation from mothers who have given birth. How does someone go about doing that, becoming a placenta donor? What if you want to do that?
You want to take that, Allison?
Sure. I think, one of the things I just am always telling people, talk to your doctor. Definitely talk to your doctor, and express an interest in donating. A lot of times the doctor needs to be working with a hospital facility where you'll be giving birth, and they need to coordinate with the team that will be collecting that tissue and performing all of the screening that George mentioned and testing to make it available for transplantation. So there's there's a long process to get to donation, consent, screening. And then once it does get to a facility like MTF, that's where we'll process it and get those grafts ready, like in some of those images that we saw.
Okay.
Yeah, another way to say that too is that every hospital participates in the deceased donor program. Every hospital can have a patient that passes away. Not every hospital has babies being born in it. Of course, there are some hospitals that specialize in that. And so, as Allison said, the best thing to do is to speak to your doctor and see if the hospital where you're going to be delivering participates in the birth tissue donation program.
Great. So do we have time? I think we have time for one last question. Let's see if we can get one up there. Can I have an open casket funeral? Big concern, Betty. Elizabeth McNamara, yes, big concern there. So any thoughts on that, George?
Yes. Yeah. Again, this is one of those very common questions, and this is something that the entire field is very conscious of. And the answer to that is yes, you can. If you were going to be able to have an open casket, a viewing before, or as part of the process, then you can still have that. Donation does not in any way affect how your body will be physically changed and viewed at that time of viewing. So yes, you can still have an open casket funeral.
Okay, so there you have it. Thank you, George and Allison, for such an informative evening. Great questions and lots of participation by our audience. I know that some of you really enjoyed the videos and hearing stories. So if you want to learn more about those stories and watch more of those videos, we have them on our website. Basically, go to mtfbiologics.org and you can see more of that. And if this session has sparked your interest in wanting to become a donor, it's a really easy thing to do. You just basically go to www.registerme.org to sign up to become a donor. And we have some more information. If you have more questions for us that we weren't able to answer on this evening session, you can email us at MTF. There's an email address at the end of our session on the outro video that you're going to see. You can send your questions into us. And again, I want to thank you for being a part of our evening. Thank you for being interactive and allowing us to answer your questions and share information about how MTF saves and heals lives. So I want to wish all of you a good night. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you all. Have a good night.